Chapter 20. My eyes fluttered open and widened as they came to a realization that we were still in the middle of the forest. A dead wolf lay close by, and I watched as it slowly shifted back into its human form. It was a man who I assumed was about 40. There was no point in checking on him, though. He was already dead. His neck was clearly snapped, though I had no clue as to whether I did that. I was assuming that I've had a blackout scenario, as my Aunt Eleanor would have called it. As I stared at the body, an amazing scent began coming towards me. Immediately made me want to run towards it. "Hilaire, are you okay?" Maddox's voice yelled from behind me. I turned, and immediately my body felt as if it was under high tension. My senses all seemed pushed back as my wolf kicked in and a single word came into focus. "Mate," I thought to myself, and I watched as Maddox emerged from the trees and was immediately in front of me, cupping my face up to look into his eyes. His touch sent tingles down my spine, and I suddenly felt faint. I had the sudden urge to just pull him down onto my lips and kiss him. I immediately froze up at the thought. "What the hell? What's wrong?" Maddox asked, and I shook my head. "Nothing. I took it down," I softly said, motioning to the dead wolf behind. I'll have someone clean it up. Let's head back to the pack house now," Maddox said, and I obediently nodded, trying to process why I was suddenly so submissive and silent. It was probably because I was in shock. As Maddox turned around to leave, I grabbed his hand, and he turned to look at me with wide eyes. I paused and watched as he smirked and squeezed my hand as we walked back to the pack house together. I was in the shower as I heard Maddox walk around the room. "I've left the water running for 15 minutes now as I've been trying to process what was going on with my body." I stepped out of the shower and wrapped myself up in a towel before taking another towel to dry my hair. I placed my hands on the counter by the sink and stared at my reflection. I felt as if I forgot something, like a heavy feeling was crushing my chest. Unable to pinpoint what it was, I resumed my usual routine and left the bathroom in just a towel. "We'll have dinner in 5 minutes. Do you want anything in particular?" Maddox began, but he trailed off as he looked at me. "What?" I asked with a raised eyebrow before realizing I was only wearing a towel. "Oh right. Gimme a sec," I muttered before sliding the closet door aside and pulling out my clothes. Maddox turned around so that his back was faced towards me, and I smirked. Always so kind, I thought to myself. I pulled on my underwear and a pair of plain black joggers that were fairly comfortable and a military green tank top. Then I shrugged on a long black cardigan and shoved my feet into a pair of plain black flip-flops. "Done?" Maddox asked just as I had combed my fingers through my wet hair. "Let's go," I said, and Maddox turned around with a grin before we headed down to the dining area. As we were eating in the dining room, I felt a familiar set of eyes on me, and I realized it was coming from Hilaire. She seemed to be calling me, so I walked over to her, leaving my siblings bickering about which TV show was the best and which cartoon character was the strongest. "Kitsy says, seems like you're having a lot of fun," Ari said, and I nodded my head as we sat down in the living room. "Never a dull moment with my family," I said, and Ari smiled. "Hilaire, I need you to be honest with me," Ari suddenly said in a serious tone. I looked at her and saw that she had her eyes closed. "Have you seen Faustus lately?" she asked, and I raised an eyebrow. "No, I only see him in those weird dreams and flashbacks I have." "Why?" asked, and Ari opened her eyes and revealed a worried look. "I can sense him here sometimes. He's somewhere in this territory. His presence has been lurking around, and it's irritating my servants, particularly Mikhail. That boy has a grudge against Faustus. I'm afraid of what Faustus is planning and what he's done to you," Ari said with a sigh. "The full moon is in 3 days, and there is darkness lingering everywhere. If you even feel a slight change or something even the most minutely different about anything, tell me immediately," Ari said, and I nodded my head. "Of course," I said, and Ari smiled before her shoulders fell into a more relaxed position. "I can sense that the bond is almost fully restored." "I'm glad," Ari said with a wide smile. "Not excited," I mutter with a shrug, and Ari laughed as we began to talk about random things. By the time I had gone up to the room to sleep, it was already past 2 in the morning. I had spent most of the night on a chick flick marathon with my sister. Classic, I know. Maddox was still working in his office, and I had decided that I would just Sit down and read a book or something. I was reading a few of the old human tales about werewolves. Those were always a good laugh. Nothing better than getting a kick out of what humans thought of us supernatural beings. The book I was now reading was old and yellowed. The paper already felt very delicate, and each page was so stiff that I feared I would have ruined it if I turned a page too excitedly. I sighed as I flipped through the book before I found a story I had never heard of before. Strangely enough, it was titled Cardis, not that I knew what that even meant. I breezed through it. It was a story of two ancient lovers that bore a child of various supernatural powers. The child was said to be blessed by the moon goddess herself, and like all fairy tales, she was one of the fairest people anyone would come across. She never aged. And one day the people realized that she was an abnormality. They hunted her down for centuries, and finally, on a night of a full moon, an entire village of humans surrounded her home, a haven in the woods, in an attempt to kill her and destroy the family she had finally had. The lady herself had gone out to perform a ritual by the river. The mob of humans killed her 3 children and captured her husband. When the lady returned home, she found her home destroyed, and she wept over the deaths of her children. To save her husband, she disguised herself with a cloaking spell and entered the village that same night. There she found her husband at the stake, bruised and bloodied. The villagers yelled obscenities at her husband and threw rocks at him. Rage took over the woman and she screamed. In her anger she released her powers, and her rage engulfed the entire village in flames. After the attack, she tried to heal her husband but found that even he had feared her. So she gave him a gift, a silver dagger covered in gems to mark that she existed. The dagger allowed her husband to heal, but she disappeared. Shortly after, I flipped to the last page of the book and traced the drawing of the lady's figure with my fingertips. As I did so, I felt a slight pang of pain hit from my core. I gasped and gaped for air as the pain began to come in waves and overwhelmed me. I heard the clatter of objects falling onto the floor before I found Maddox staring at me. "Shit," Maddox muttered as I continued to gasp for air. "What the hell?" I hissed, and I watched as Maddox went towards me and embraced me tightly. His touch immediately calmed me down, and I breathed a sigh of relief. The waves of pain had dulled down into a slight discomfort. "You're in heat," Maddox said in a low voice. My eyes widened as I softly pushed him away and looked into his eyes. They were a golden color that revealed his lust. I bit my bottom lip and he growled lowly. "This is going to be hell." "Yet another werewolf thing I hate," I said as Maddox pulled me into his lap. "God has helped me with my patience," Maddox muttered as he switched our position so that he was lying against the bed frame and I was straddling him. I felt a wave of pain hit me once more and I fell against him, my chest heaving from the large gulps of air I started to inhale. "We are not doing the..." "I'm not going to do anything you don't want me to," Maddox said, interrupting me. I nodded my head in relief. I was not going to have a sexual adventure right now. No motherfucking way. "I hate my life," I mumbled, and Maddox chuckled as he held me, his touch allowing me to focus away from the pain, although the sparks of electricity I felt when he touched me were certainly making my wolf think of different things. "Do you want Hillary to?" "Nope," I said. The last thing I needed was for anyone else to know that I went into heat. Never in my life did I think I would even experience the hell that female wolves endure. Who the hell wanted to be in pain and have sex? Why would anyone think that this was a good idea? It just sounded like a really sad excuse to get laid. "Are you comfortable?" Maddox asked, and I knew he was trying really hard as his voice was strained whenever I pressed myself against him. The more my body touched him, the less I felt the pain, which was why I had no complaints when Maddox intertwined our legs together and left me on his chest. He had lowered himself down onto the bed so that we were now both lying down together. "I'm as comfortable as I can get, I guess," I said as Maddox cupped my cheek. I looked up at him and watched as our faces neared each other's. Our lips brushed slightly and my breath hitched. Maddox leaned over and I captured his lips with my own. I ran my hands through his hair as I pulled him over me so that he hovered above me. I pulled him down by hooking my arm around his neck. Maddox growled into my mouth as I used my legs to press his lower body against mine. "Rip it off like a band-aid, Alynna," I thought to myself. Rip, 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 rip it. Rip it off like a... Maddox slipped his tongue into my mouth, and we began our usual battle for dominance in our kiss. Fuck it, I muttered in my mind. I moaned as Maddox trailed his hands behind my back. The pain from before died down just as fast as it came as Maddox began kissing my jaw. He didn't try to mark me. Instead, he just kissed me down from my neck. He broke away to pull off my tank top, tossing it aside as he kissed the top of my chest. He came back up and gave me a deep kiss that took my breath away as he pulled back and gazed down at me. Perfect, he said, and I rolled my eyes. My instincts told me, and I pulled him back down for a kiss. I pulled away and dragged him to me so that my mouth was by his ear. I didn't tell you to stop, I said in a breathless whisper as I kissed him from the edge of his jaw down to his chin. So don't, I said, and Maddox's eyes flashed an even darker color before we resumed our business. Maddox had been kissing me lower until he got to the waistband of my pants. He searched my eyes for permission, and just as I was about to give it, a knock on the door came to our attention. Alpha, Lunar. There are rogues rushing in from the western borders. We've sent 3 of our sectors out there, but Miss Hellary says that there's something off. We'll be right out, I answered for Maddox, who smirked at me. Maddox kissed me quickly before pulling back. Stay here. I'll have Hellary come to you, Maddox said as he got off the bed. No fucking way. You're still in heat. I don't want any other wolf smelling you the way you are now, especially not a rogue, Maddox said in a loud growl. I rolled my eyes as I sat up. Fine, but you better get your ass back here in 5 minutes. Otherwise I'm going to end up looking for someone else to do this whole shenanigan with, I said, and Maddox growled possessively, making me laugh. I pulled myself off the bed and picked up my tank top. Kidding. Go, I said as I pulled the waistband of his pants towards me and ran a hand down his chest with the slightest bit of self-control. With my free hand, I pulled him down for another deep kiss, and I darted my tongue into his mouth, causing him to moan into my mouth. You're going to kill me here, Maddox said as I pulled away and shrugged. If that gets you back faster, then I'll gladly continue, I said with a sly grin on my face, and Maddox chuckled before he pressed one last kiss to my lips and headed out the door. As soon as he left, I felt a strange weight fall onto my shoulders. I shrugged the feeling off. I probably just missed him from the heat. It was nothing. Chapter 21. I think she should do it, Jasper argued for me as we discussed the rogues from earlier this morning. They attacked at just around 2 in the morning, and Maddox had gotten home extremely pissed. The wolves in charge of the borders were put to sleep with a spell, and Hellary had to perform a cleansing where the rogues had gone. The rogues themselves seemed to have been branded and were quickly thrown into the dungeons. I was glad that my family had gone out for some sightseeing around Oregon, although I doubted there was much to see. They'd probably decided to head all the way to Portland for all I knew. I think I should do it too, I said with a smirk, and Maddox sighed. You should really stop siding with her, Maddox told Jasper, who simply smirked in reply. From what I heard, she's ruthless, so I think Alynna can manage to get the info out of these folks, Jasper casually said, and I nodded my head. I think so too. I know you do, that's why I'm asking other people what they think, Maddox said, and I rolled my eyes at him. I haven't done anything since the attack, Maddox. I think I can handle getting info out of a rogue or two. There's only one night until we know. Jasper and I argued at the same time, and we high-fived each other. Maddox sighed and looked at the others in the council. Trevor and Carson both had amused looks on their faces. Naomi didn't seem to care about the situation, and Ian didn't seem bothered. Rena and Lorraine seemed excited. I'd love to see it happen, Trevor said, and Ian nodded. I'm all for it. Rena began. It's not every day that the Luna tortures. We're avoiding that word, Lorraine told Rena, and she rolled her eyes. Okay, whatever. Either way, I think Luna Allaire can handle it, Rena said, and I cringed ever so slightly at the sound of that title. Luna Allaire? Really? No one else has a problem with it other than you, I quietly said to Maddox. And he sighed again. Fine. Head to the dungeons. We'll all be there in case anything happens. Hellary should already be there, Maddox said in defeat. I silently did a fist pump for myself and saw Maddox glare at me. As everyone left the room, I hugged Maddox from behind and he sighed. Don't get too aggressive. Your eyes went blood red the last time this happened. No problem, I reassuringly said, and Maddox nodded as I let go of him and skipped off to join the others in the dungeons. I have never been so glad to wear leather boots. Hilary had already made the cells all bloodied and messy. Walking on pools of blood wasn't exactly my cup of tea. Hilary seemed really tense. I could feel it in the heavy weight in the air and the way that the whole group had gone quiet. Everyone in the small council that Maddox had was with me. The stench of fresh blood was everywhere. This cell was pure stone walls with just enough light to see the 4 rogues secured with thick chains and straps onto inclined torture beds. Doesn't seem like there's much left for me to do, I muttered, and Hilary sighed as she turned to look at me. She had splatters of blood all over her. To be honest, she looked quite horrifying, especially with the cold look in her eyes. I haven't tried to talk to them. I've only done some more damage. The build up of stress should make it easier, but more than anything, I wanted to make them pay, Hilary said in an icy cold tone. I raised an eyebrow and she shook her head. Whoever sent them wanted to send a message. These guys are meant for ritual purposes. They've got inscriptions down their backs. I've read them and each one is different. Stay cautious. What is that supposed to mean? The ritual inscriptions involve you, if it helps. One of them was singing the same song as before. I don't think I want to hear it again, I said. You won't. He's out cold anyways, Hilary said as I made my way to a table filled with tools. I took the usual container of wolfsbane and a set of plain daggers before examining the 3 rogues. My blood ran cold. Alynna, are you okay? Jasper asked, and I didn't respond. Instead I walked towards one of the rogues, a male with long brown hair that's been soaked through with blood and sweat. I placed the wolfsbane down on a little stool in front of the rogue along with the daggers. The rogue stirred slightly and I sighed. Any of you have a gun? I asked, and I heard the shuffling of feet and some rustling of pockets. Me, a female voice said, and I turned around to face Naomi, who pulled out a gun from the back of her thick jacket. Trevor, Rena, Lorraine, and everyone else gawked at her except for Ari, who just smirked as she watched Naomi toss the gun towards me. I nodded my thanks. I caught it with my right hand and checked the cartridge. It was a normal handgun, probably something that Maddox had stocked for those involved in Maine security. There were 15 bullets in it, and I sighed as I pushed the cartridge back in and cocked the gun at the rogue's foot. I didn't even have to take a breath. I aimed and fired. The loud agonizing scream of the rogue filled the room immediately, and I rolled my eyes. Wakey, wakey, Dallas, I said, and watched as the rogue's eyes widened. He squirmed in his binds, and I prepared the gun for another shot. Last time I saw you, you were still in training back in the squadron, I said, ignoring his heavy breathing as I examined the handgun. He coughed and groaned. Faustus. He's found you, Dallas said, and I rolled my eyes. Dallas had been a part of my squadron. No one in the squadron was ever close. We were all focused on our duty. We worked together, and when one of us fell, we accepted their sacrifice and moved on. Things were easily run that way, and Dallas was one of my squadron members. Never quite on par, but never far behind me. So I've heard, I said with a shrug as I pulled the slide of the gun and the bullet locked in preparation for a shot. Dallas' face was bloody, but he smirked at me. Good, Dallas simply said, and I sighed. I just want to know why you were here last night, I said, and when he didn't respond, I pointed the gun at his knee. You know my methods, doll, I said. And Dallas lets out a laugh that sounded more like a wheeze. Pulled the trigger. The sound of the gunshot echoed all over the room, causing the other rogues to stir to life. Dallas' scream revealed his agony, but I stared blankly at him, examining his face. Faustus told me to tell you this.
Sila jo skajve, I over andet en farvel.
Dallas said in a hoarse voice before laughing maniacally just as the other rogues in the room growled rabidly. Alynna, what's going? Jillian said, but despite all the growling in Dallas' laugh, the ground seemed to shake. I turned around and looked at Hilary, whose odd-colored eyes have both turned blood red. Let me translate that for everyone. Your friend Dallas is saying he knows you have a purpose. Don't forget. If you're telling me that Faustus can communicate with Alynna in my language, then you have some nerve, Hilary said loudly.
Et œuvre guérin.
He's as ritum ti ivren irvan, Hilary said as the ground stabilized and she looked to me. I don't care what information they think they have. Kill them before they do their jobs. He's useless and deserves to go die with his friends. The wolves began to growl in response. Their anger seemed to reverberate in the cells. Yet another bad omen, Hilary mumbled to herself as she began to walk out of the room. I sighed as I realized that Hilary was right. The look in Dallas' eyes was full of something dark and lost, as if his mind had been broken. He'd already been tortured, but in a way that only witches can derange the mind. I took the gun in my hands and walked away to the center. There was no need to get bloody anyways. I aimed at Dallas and shot. I then pulled the slide of my gun and did the same to the other two before I silently walked out of the room, the mini council following behind me. What did you say to him? I asked Hilary, who walked in front of me out of the dungeons. I told him he was useless and to die with his friends.
Et œuvre en guérin.
That's how you tell someone they're useless in my language, Hilary said with a smirk, and I nodded my head. There are bad things ahead of us. I suggest you enjoy the peace we have for the meantime. I can hardly act like a normal human. Faustus and I have a terrible history. Perhaps I should stop acting so casual. I'm not even mortal. And I have a family to protect, Hilary said, and I raised an eyebrow. The council behind me muttered words to each other before they began sprinting off, probably from Maddox's orders. What do you mean? I asked, and Hilary smiled at me. Mikhail and Scar are two of the first people that came into my service. They are as good as my blood, and like them, I take in as many children as I can. Know how bad it can get when one loses their family. It's painful. And it's even worse to know that you aren't accepted, Hilary said. I read a story last night. It was called Cardis, right? Hilary asked me, and I nodded my head. Yeah, that. Hilary smiled sadly at me. I don't have to tell you that it was my story, right? Cardis was the name of my husband back then, Hilary told me, and I tried not to react, but that would make Hilary ancient. Let's take a walk, shall we? Maddox will come across our path anyways, Hilary said, and I nodded as we walked into the woods. How or why? My story never actually started in that damned village. If you must know, my husband and I never met again after that. I healed him and left him. He wrote this book in a letter only 3 years before he died. His daughter came to work for me, but we were no longer related. She handed me the letter and I allowed its publication. The rest is history. How'd he know about your backstory? I asked. I mean, it said something about being blessed by the goddess, but you know. I trailed off. Hilary laughed as we walked together, and I paused. Cardis has always been one to talk fancy words. I'm not blessed. In fact, if anything, I'm cursed. Faustus made sure of that when he tortured Cardis. Human as he was and human as our children were, I loved them all. I left my entire organization in the hands of Mikhail and Scar, and the one day that I went back to visit them, Faustus attacked, Hilary said with a sigh, and I felt her anger seep from her being. Cardis' daughter is an ancestor of Maddox's, Hilary said. What? I asked, and Hilary chuckled slightly. I doubt Maddox knows the truth, but when the option was available to her, I was the one who took care of the preparations to send Maddox's originating pack here to the Americas, Hilary said with a shrug. How Cardis' family ended up with wolves is a mystery to me. The goddess works in strange ways, but Maddox reminds me much of my lost son. I had 3 children, 2 of which were girls that were no older than 7. My son was 14 and almost ready for the world back then, Hilary said with a wistful look. It's not my place to explain, but Maddox had never known his mother. When I came to visit, I felt the need to guide him. His father, however, was undeniably an asshole. He caused trouble wherever he went. It earned them the title of macabre, and made me responsible for restraining him, Hilary explained, and I nodded my head as we sat down on a couple of tree stumps. Maddox has known me since he was 10, and after hundreds of years of trying to forget my lost family, I allowed myself to treat him as my own. I value you just as much as he does for being his mate, and for being someone who can make the boy listen. I would do anything to protect his happiness as he would protect yours, Hilary said, and I suddenly felt the urge to shrink away. A lump formed in my throat, and Hilary sighed. There was something trying to claw away at my mind. There was something I had to say. My lips quivered, but Hilary didn't notice. What is it? Why is this feeling gnawing at me like Hilaire? Hilary called, and my thoughts were pulled aside. I asked, and Hilary shook her head. The mate bond seems like it's completely healed, Hilary said, and I bit my bottom lip. I mumbled, trying not to make it seem like a big deal. I mean, meh. It was not like I went into heat or anything. It was not like I had the urge to jump Maddox's bones. It was also not like I had the urge to kill myself after I thought about the two things I just talked about. Like I said, meh. That's good, Hilary said with a smile. At least something is going well. Let's hope for the best. I'll do my best to keep everything safe and sound for the next days to come, Hilary said, and I nodded my head. Safe and sound, huh? Sounds good to me, I said, and Hilary laughed as we made our way to the pack house. Chapter 22. Okay, so we've gotten your nails cleaned and polished, and we got you a facial. Should we get you a new haircut? Celine asked. I'm done, I said with a sigh. Oh, come on. You didn't even put nail polish on, Celine exclaimed as my mother laughed. It's a mating ceremony, not a wedding, I said as I rolled my eyes. Besides, it's not like Maddox will get all pretty, so why should I? Asked, and my mother giggled. Let your sister make the choice, Celine. She just isn't the type to do much of things like this, Mother said. Whatever. Celine rolled her eyes. How about we go get some coffee and then we can talk? Winter suggested, and I nodded my head. Sounds great, I said as we walked away from the shops. We were at the Bridgeport in Portland again, and I swear I could have made do with a small shop closer to Maddox's territory. However, my sister whined, and Winter had to run a few errands. In fear of anything bad happening today, Maddox had the whole place surrounded by pack members that were very discreet in their roles in guarding me. I did, however, pick them out of the crowd. It was pretty fun. Everyone would always widen their eyes whenever I approached them to tell them they were doing a good job. It was only awkward when they bowed their heads and called me Luna Alaire. I didn't think I'll ever get used to that. We entered the Bridge City Cafe and waited as Celine and Winter ordered their drinks. Are you ready for tonight? My mother asked, and I nodded my head. Ready enough, I guess, I said with a shrug. Well, at least you'll be a part of his pack now, she said. It's probably the only thing I'm looking forward to, I said. Oh, don't be like that, sweetheart. I'm sure Maddox will treat Why. Mom, please. I don't want to hear anything about that kind of stuff, I said, cringing to myself. My mother laughed, and I groaned as Celine and Winter brought over our drinks. Sounds like you guys are having a fun conversation, Winter said with a smirk. Kill me, I said with a sigh as I took my coffee. We spent a few hours in the coffee shop talking about things other than the ceremony, like how Ender was doing. Ender and I had never gone without communicating for so long. We normally kept in touch with letters despite my far locations during my time in the squadron. Ender had always been the clingier twin, and as his older twin sister, I always tried to make sure that he was comfortable. Now, he was leading most of the meetings and handling the Blood Moon pack as the alpha. My father was ready to step down, and I was glad to hear Ender doing well. Oh crap. I forgot to get something, Celine said as we exited the cafe. What? I said, raising an eyebrow. Oh yeah, I forgot about that too, Winter exclaimed. I think I should help you too with that, my mother said, and she smirked at me. We'll only be away for 10 minutes. Do you mind being alone until then? She asked. I'm more than capable of handling myself, Mother, I said. All right, let's go get that thing then, my mother said. I raised an eyebrow as they all scurried away. What the hell was that about? I wondered as I walked off, passing through shops. Just then I heard whispers in the wind. I looked around and spotted a few of the macabre pack, but none of them seemed to notice. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath, focusing on the voices. The fountain, one of the voices said. I looked around again but spotted no one in particular. Calmly, I made my way to the fountain. My blurry reflection was all that I saw. Just as I was about to look away, I saw a dark figure beside me in the water. I looked to my side and saw no one. I looked into the water again, and I found the figure standing right behind me. Rememorari Alaire. You have a purpose. Mination he's done, who pet heiress. Relasirio opere ti liger. A loud voice said from behind me. It was then that the words made sense. Remember, Alaire. My patience is running thin. Come to me and release your power, little girl, it said. I froze up and felt a cold shiver run down my spine. I stared at my reflection and looked into my eyes. They were glowing red and I felt a sense of calm overpower me. My subconscious felt suspended into the back of my mind. When the night is over and the ceremony has been completed, you will return to us, the voice whispered, and I felt myself smirk at my reflection. You know, you don't have to wipe my memories away all the time, I said as I turned around and came face to face with the shadow. The shadow dissipated, and Faustus revealed himself to me. My brother is very perceptive of my presence, Faustus said with a smile. You mean your brother, Mikhail? You two look alike, though I doubt he'll notice you here, I said with a shrug as we began to walk. The members of Macabre. I cloaked us the moment I deciphered your ridiculous message. They should still be thinking that I'm just walking around waiting for the others to return, I said with a shrug. You'll remove the mate bond after the ceremony, right? I asked. There is no need for it anymore. The plan continues and you will be perfect for the job. Don't worry about a thing. I will handle the rest, Faustus calmly said. I will create a distraction as the dawn sets. You can disappear. Then. Good, I said, and Faustus smirked. Farvel min silder, Faustus said, and with a blink of an eye his figure disappeared. I balled my hands into fists. Got you, I thought to myself. Thank goddess he didn't notice. I looked around and spotted the members of Macabre inside. The things a little spell could do. I looked at the sky. It was almost sundown. The time I had left to prepare was short. I didn't have much time. I walked to the fountain once more. Let's do a little test run, yeah? I mumbled to myself. I stared at the running water. Cephrio, I muttered, and the surface of the water slowly began to freeze. Elaire, Celine's voice called. I turned, the ice cracking as I released my hold on it. Yeah, I asked and Celine grinned. Let's go. Ian's here to pick us up, Celine giddily said, and I nodded as we headed back. I was going to end Faustus' hold on me tonight. I need to talk to Maddox, I said as I walked into the pack house. He's in his office, the one down the hall, Jasper told me as he walked over to Winter. I then made my way towards Maddox's office. The heels of my boots clicked on the floor, and I sighed as I opened the door to his office. I paused when I spotted someone else there. A woman. Come on, Maddox, there's no way my father would agree to an allegiance without having us. I cleared my throat, interrupting the woman's voice. Maddox looked at me and I could practically feel him relax. The tension in the air was almost palpable. I need to talk to you, I said. You heard her, Maddox told the woman, and she glared right at him and then at me. She had a bob haircut dyed in a crimson color that matched with her lips and strong eyeliner. Not gonna lie, she was fairly pretty, but she looked like she was 30 with the outfit she was wearing. Who still wears cheetah print dresses? Okay, I wouldn't judge anyone, but that was not. Who the hell are you? She asked with a hint of sass, and I rolled my eyes. I don't have time for this. Is she a friend of yours? I asked Maddox and he shook his head. Hardly. She came by because her father wants us to form an alliance, but her wishes are different from her father's. She's a complication at best, Maddox said, and I smirked as the red of the girl's hair traveled down to her cheeks. Someone was pissed. I'm from the... Look, I don't have time, so shut the fuck up right now and leave, I said in a cold voice. When she didn't move, I shook my head. Do you understand English? I said leave, I said. She was about to open her mouth and I rolled my eyes as I pulled a gun out of the waistband of my jeans, pulled the slide, aimed and fired right by the side of her face. The bullet grazed her cheek and she gawked at me. Like I said, get the fuck out of this office before I shoot your pretty little redhead. I doubt anyone will even figure out you've bled to death when I'm done, I said, and I grinned as her lips quivered and she ran out faster than a cheetah could have. Funny 'cause she's wearing a dress. Okay, fine. Anyways, once the door shut, I made my way over to Maddox and he immediately placed his hands on my waist. The action sent a delicious sensation down my spine, but I did my best to shake it off. I couldn't have any distractions right now. Maddox, we have an issue. I need to say it before he realizes, I said, and Maddox raised his eyebrows. What is it? Who is he? Maddox asked possessively. I think it'd be better to discuss it if Hillary was here, I said. Okay then, Maddox said as he removed one of his hands from my waist and used it to pick up his phone. He dialed a number and without even putting the phone to his ear he dropped the call. I raised my eyebrows and he smirked. "She'll be here," he said, and I nodded my head. "Do you want to tell me what's going on before she gets here?" he asked me. "Well, in one word." I trailed off as I looked at his desk. "Lothian," I said, and the papers on his desk began to lift. Maddox's eyes widened as the papers didn't just fly off, they floated up and suspended in the air. "Well then," Maddox simply said, and I rolled my eyes. "Well then is right. I don't have much time. With the ceremony tonight, Faustus has probably begun preparing." "Faustus? I told you not to worry about Hi. Maddox," I said in a commanding tone as I let the papers file in order in the air and land in Maddox's desk. "He's going to take me tonight and I won't be able to defy him like I did tonight. I'll be too weak to resist his hold on my soul. The fucker's been trying to mess up my head since the day I entered the squadron. I'll tell you about it later, but right now I need Hillary to trace Faustus. He'll know we've interfered if I do it myself," I said, and Maddox cupped my cheek. "All right," he said as the door to his office opened, revealing Hillary with her servants Mikhail and Scar. "What's the problem?" she asked, and I stared at her. "Ivra Vettel hail. There are indeed bad omens," I stated, and Hillary raised her eyebrows. "Urchery alair," Hillary said. I looked at Maddox and used one of my hands to summon a white flame at the center of the room. "Faustus," Mikhail growled lowly, baring his teeth. "Calm down," Hillary said. "Let's listen to her story before jumping to conclusions." "All right then," I said with a shrug. I led Maddox onto the couches and we all sat except for Hilary's servants. "This is going to take a while," I trailed off. Chapter 23. I sighed as I casually poured myself a bit of whiskey into a glass. "So how long does this break away from his control last?" Mikhail asked sternly, and I turned to face them. Maddox, Hillary, and her servants were now seated on the two couches facing one another. "Approximately an hour or so, which was why I can't waste any time at all. Faustus always knows where I am, so he leaves behind a trail for you to track. I can't do it myself. He'll find me. In fact, I don't think anyone can other than you." I looked at Hillary. "You can trace him from it without being noticed." "Very well. This will take no time at all, so sit down," Hillary calmly said. And I watched as Maddox got up, took my glass of whiskey, and drank a bit of it. I raised an eyebrow, and he wrapped an arm around my waist, gently leading me back to the couch, my glass still in his hands. I sat down and sighed as I offered Hillary my left hand. She took it and closed her eyes. When she opened them again, her eyes were aglow and were looking into a place beyond what the normal eye could see. I felt a warm tingling sensation from my palms. After a few seconds, Hillary closed her eyes again and opened them to reveal her odd-colored eyes. "He's a bit too far off right now, but I should be able to find him once he calls for you," Hillary said, and I breathed a sigh of relief. "All right, I can feel my hold on my consciousness waning, so let me just show you what I need to say," I said. Hillary nodded, and I looked over at Maddox, who gave me an encouraging nod. I leaned into him before I speak. "Rememorari. Ir hister." I closed my eyes and I felt a soft breeze surround us. When I opened my eyes, I found that we're in my room. Well, my cell. It was nothing but stone and dim light. I spotted myself, a small frail body, curled into a dark corner. "Is that you?" Maddox asked from my side. I looked at him and nodded. Hillary was on my right with her servant standing behind her, and Maddox was to my left. "I was 10 years old," I said. I watched as the old me leaned her head against the cold wall. "I was being punished for refusing to kill my opponent in a combat session," I said, and walked over to the little girl. She had puffy eyes and red cheeks that revealed her tear-stained face. "When did Faustus first?" Hillary began, but she was interrupted by a male voice. "Elaire," the voice called out, and the little version of myself stood up and began sobbing. "I didn't know. I didn't mean to disobey. She was my..." She started, but she became quiet as Faustus walked in. He gave her a kind smile and wrapped her in his embrace. "SSA. Elaire. Min Silder, there are no friendships here. You know that," Faustus said. "She was about to kill your aunt, and you shouldn't feel bad for her. She's gone now." "But," You will not sleep here tonight, my child. Your aunt has forgiven you and tonight we continue the ceremonies as planned, Faustus said as he tilted her head up. My past self revealed a set of determined eyes. Renar Liger. Farvel he's Tiopir. Strong little girl, forget your powers, Faustus said. And the scene disappeared. You were bound to his commands, Hilary said. I'm bound by blood. The night of the mating ceremony is supposed to complete the binding process, I said. I have no clue on the details, but I trust that by the time the night is over I would have been long gone, I said, and Hilary nodded her head. Troubling to say the least, she said, and I felt Maddox hold me closer. I will see what I can do. Mikhail, go and do your best to prepare for Faustus' arrival. Scar, come with me. Tracking is what you do best, Hilary said, and the two men walked to the door and opened it for Hilary. As for the two of you, there are only 2 more hours until the mating ceremony. I suggest you place a new seer into the Scal Ilaire. Should your consciousness fade away, the seer should be able to help fight some of Faustus' hold on you for now. She smiled as she walked away, the two men closing the door behind her. Trouble in paradise already, Maddox said, worry etched into his face. Turned around to face him. Whatever happens tonight, I'm glad I got to feel what it was like to have a mate, I said, and Maddox's face turned into an expression of concern. And you won't forget it, he said as he cupped my cheek. I leaned into it and enjoyed the warm tingles it sent down my spine. I will forget the time I spent telling you all about Faustus. I have only a few minutes left, I said, and Maddox nodded. I wrapped my arms around his neck and gently pulled him down so that our noses touched. I will do everything that I SSA. I placed a finger on his lips and closed my eyes. Min Tevra.
Vi odere, en farvel vren renare siorvron, sila ushaiva, Eastside, knowing.
He would never decipher that. It meant my love, listen, don't forget, you are powerful, but he knows it too. Wah. A little charm for the night. I lied with a soft smile before I felt a darkness come over me. I felt faint and weak as I fell into Maddox's chest. Take care of us tonight, Maddox. I doubt I will be able to do anything, I muttered as my eyes grew heavy with sleep. I swear I will, Maddox said just as the darkness consumed me. Chapter 24. What was I doing sleeping on the couch in Maddox's office when I have like an hour left until I have to get ready? How did I get here? I asked as Maddox looked up from the paperwork on his desk. I found you knocked out in the living room. I was going to carry you up to the room, but I figured I might as well bring you here since this is the other office I use, Maddox said. Great. Is it bad to have signs of Alzheimer's before a mating ceremony? Asked sarcastically, and Maddox smirked as he got up and walked over to me. Not really, although I'm a bit surprised you had a gun on you, Maddox said. And I raised an eyebrow as I immediately reached for the back pockets of my jeans. It was empty. Maddox, I said in warning. You had the safety off and you were asleep. How else was I supposed to keep you safe? Maddox asked as he pulled one of my beloved guns out of his back pocket. Why the hell would the safety be off? I asked. It was not like I used it at the mall. I don't know. You really shouldn't ask me. I just found it like that, Maddox said, and I squinted my eyes at him. Liar, I said with a sigh as I stood up. Maddox stood as well and immediately wrapped his arms around my waist. Maddox, are you okay? I asked. Yup, just wanting to hold you before the ceremony. I rolled my eyes and as I did so, my eyes landed on Maddox's wall. Maddox released me from his hold and sighed. I'm going to go ahead and prepare for the ceremony. You staying for much longer? Maddox asked me and I shook my head. Why, yeah, go ahead, I said and didn't even turn to watch Maddox as he left. Instead, I moved towards the wall. I used my index finger to touch it. There was a bullet hole. I turned on my phone's flashlight. There was a bullet embedded into it, and as I shone my light on it, I examined the bullet. What the fuck? I sighed as I pulled on the dress. It was a beautiful white dress with long, silken sleeves and a skirt that flowed down elegantly to my knees. It was silk, and made my body look like it was masked in liquid pearl. I simply let down my hair in its usual waves. I didn't wear any form of footwear, and to be honest, I looked like I had just gone out of a relaxing bath. I took a twirl in front of the mirror. The silk moved with my movements and Just felt absolutely wonderful on my skin. I had to thank Hilary for it later. I sighed as I opened the box of series on the nightstand and took one out. Only had 2 remaining. I stood in front of the mirror and felt for the scowl at the back of my neck. I carefully slid the sear in and sighed as I felt it cool down my body. Ready? Hilary's voice asked, and I looked at the door only to find her peeking her head through it. Yeah, I said with a shrug as she made her way in. Good, Hilary said with a smile. I have to say the dress looks great on you, she said. Thanks, I have you to thank, I replied before releasing a heavy breath. I'm feeling nervous and I don't know why, I blurted out, and Hilary chuckled softly. Don't worry about anything. It's a full moon and the pack is celebrating. Not to mention your family is here, she said. True, I said before fiddling with the material of the skirt. Let's just go. Get this over with. Hilary nodded, and we walked together out of the pack house and down into the forest. I hate people. I hate attention, I said, and Hilary chuckled. Well, you're bound to be the center of all attention tonight. Don't worry. I'm sure you already know the words you have to say. Hilary reassured me, and I bit my bottom lip. Fuck it, it was going to happen sometime, I muttered. We walked to the waterfall at the edge of the lake, and I fought the urge to roll my eyes as I spotted the area. It was lit with paper lanterns all around, and all members of the pack had surrounded the circular slab of stone that Maddox and I had gone to before. The sky was dark, and rightfully so, as it was almost 12 midnight. The full moon seemed larger than ever, and the stars glimmered all around like never before. 2 of the pack members had already shifted into their wolves. They stood at what looked to be the beginning of the aisle formed by the gap in between the rows of pack members. They watched as I walked down the aisle, littered with blood red and white rose petals. On the slab was a marble stand that held a ceremonial bowl with detailed carvings made of polished black stone. At its center was a bright blue flame, seeping through beautiful clear crystals. Hilary made her way to the front, and I stood to her left with Maddox in front of me. He wore a casual all-white outfit consisted of a plain white shirt and a pair of white jeans. He was barefooted as well, although he wore a serious expression. The moment our eyes met, I saw the glimmer of excitement in them. We turned our attention to Hilary, and she smiled. Members of the macabre pack, Hilary began, raising her hands, the sound of the waterfall seemingly fading away at the sound of her voice. Tonight we secure the bond of 2 capable leaders. Macabre, tonight we are to officiate the joining of your Alpha Maddox Cross and your future Luna Alynna Richelieu. May the goddess bless this union and strengthen the macabre pack, Hilary said as her voice radiated power. Maddox placed his right hand over the flame with his palm facing the sky. Placed mine on top of his with my palm facing his, clasping his hands. Maddox squeezed mine, and I sighed as the light of the full moon began to focus on the bowl. The blue flame rose, but there was no heat or burning sensation. The flame eventually wrapped itself around our hands. Alynna Richelieu, as Alpha of the macabre pack and your mate, will you renounce your pack to join and lead the macabre pack as a new member in its Luna? Maddox asked. I, Alynna Richelieu, renounce the Blood Moon pack to be joined with her mate, and be his equal as a new member of the macabre pack and as his Luna, I said. Maddox beamed at me, and Hilary smiled as well. I looked at my mother and siblings and saw their happy faces. There is no other person in this world that can be happier than I am at this moment. My mother mind linked me, and as I closed my eyes I felt my connection to her and my siblings fade away. Can you hear me? A voice asked through the mind link. I smiled as I opened my eyes to Maddox's blazing amber eyes. Loud and clear I mind linked back, and Maddox smiled as he lifted our hands in the air. The 2 wolves howled in the back, and the rest of the pack shouted in joy. Was about to face the rest of them when I felt my body being hurled towards someone and then lifted off the ground. I stared wide-eyed at Maddox, who has lifted me off the ground bridal style. Was about to struggle when Maddox carried me through the cheering crowd and off into the forest. I trailed off. So where are we going? I asked as Maddox still walked forward. It's AS. Don't you dare fucking say it's a secret. It's cheesy and lame, I said, and Maddox chuckled. Well then, we're going to hell, since you invited me earlier. Oh great, finally. How long does it take to get there? I asked, and Maddox laughed. 5 seconds, he said, and I raised an eyebrow. I looked around and realized we were climbing the mountain from before to jump off the waterfall. Cool, I said with a smirk. As we made our way up, I slowly snuggled up to Maddox and breathed in relief. As we slowly reached the top, silent all of a sudden? Maddox asked, and I rolled my eyes. Well, I'm enjoying the fact that I'm being carried up a mountain. It's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, I casually said, and Maddox smirked as we finally made it to the top. My eyes widened at the sight of a beautiful large teepee with a mix of flowers covering the top of the white canvas. The inside was covered with beautiful, bright glass lanterns filled with candlelight, and the ground was covered with layers of blankets and topped off with a soft white velvety material that looked all too comfortable to lie on. There were pillows all over and more than enough space for. I don't really have to say, do I? Like it? Maddox asked. Meh, I said with a shrug, and he laughed as he placed me down. The feeling of the soft ground soothing the soles of my feet. We're bound to get all those white sheets dirty from our feet, though. Oh, we were bound to get them dirty anyways, Maddox said with a smug look on his face. Before I could react, he wrapped his arms around my waist and pulled me to him so that our faces were mere centimeters away from each other. Mine at last, he said against my lips, and I rolled my eyes. Not sure how I feel about that, I said as I pulled his shirt so that we're pressed against each other further. You're mine, I said as I bit his bottom lip. He growled softly before moving his right hand up to tangle them into my hair. That works for me, Maddox quietly said as he gently tilted my head and placed his lips on mine. I wrapped my hands around his neck and moaned as we deepened the kiss. We started walking to the teepee and broke away from each other. Our eyes were a mix of lust and impatience. Maddox pulled his shirt off and placed his hand on my back, kissing me as we lie down on the sheets. I broke away first, and Maddox stared at me as I used my legs to flip us over. Much better, I said, and Maddox smirked as I leaned down and captured his lips. I began to trail kisses along his jawline and down his neck, sucking on the sensitive skin where his mark would be. Maddox growled lowly against my ear, and I smirked as my fingers trailed down to the waistband of his jeans. Maddox and I lay tangled in each other's arms in the little teepee, our clothes laid forgotten on the side, and were wrapped in between the layers of blankets that cushioned us from the cold ground. Feeling okay? Maddox asked. Did I sound like I wasn't? I asked, and Maddox laughed as he tucked a lock of my hair behind my ear. Maybe we could get you to repeat the I'm enjoying my chill session, I said, and Maddox chuckled. Well, I don't think we're going to chill for long, Maddox said as one of his hands traced my skin underneath the blankets, leaving goosebumps and sending sparks down my spine. You need to stop before I jump your bones, I said in warning as I stared at him. His eyes were filled with amusement, and I found my gaze flitting towards his bare neck. Maddox seemed to notice where I was looking since he cleared his throat. Do it, Maddox said in a low voice, and I raised my eyebrows. Already? I asked as I pulled myself up to look into his eyes. They were already dark and full of longing, as if it would do him the greatest honor. He pulled me into his lap, and I was thankful I wrapped myself in a separate blanket. I was not going to get sexual while marking him. It'll heal almost instantly, and I want you to do it, Maddox said as he caressed my cheek. I placed a gentle kiss on his lips. And it means I have more time to seduce you, Maddox said, and I rolled my eyes. This is gonna hurt, you know? I said, and Maddox smirked as he pulled me down so that our foreheads were touching. Does it look like I care? He asked, and I grinned before kissing him once more. Maddox groaned as I trailed my hands down his body, exploring every crevice of his chiseled skin. I moved my lips down, and Maddox caressed my back as my canines elongated. Mine, I said. Yours, Maddox responded before I bit into his neck. Maddox strained underneath me and grunted, but after a while, he stopped and took a deep breath. I knew it was excruciating. He seemed so tense, and the taste of blood in my mouth wasn't too appealing. I promptly released him and looked at my handiwork. Maddox's amber eyes were bright even in the dark light, and I watched under the bright candlelight as the bleeding wound disappeared and immediately began to heal. The mark was of my canines. It was like a faint scar of welts against his skin. I traced my fingers around it, and Maddox's breath caught in his throat. He stared at me, and I felt an electrifying sensation run through me. Beautiful, Maddox's voice said in my head. I stared at him and smirked. Oh, so that's what you're thinking, I said, and he grinned. What else could I possibly think of? Maddox asked as he pulled me down to him. He captured my lips in a deep kiss, and I used my hands to keep me balanced. Probably marking me, I mind-linked back, and Maddox laughed into our kiss. We broke apart, and I watched as his eyes turned a dark lust-filled color. Was that a yes? Would anyone's mate say no? Maddox asked in a low and dangerous voice. Smirked as his wolf instincts kicked in. So what are you waiting for? I asked, and Maddox growled as we switched positions at almost lightning speed. I have no idea, Maddox said as he placed his face on my neck. But I do like to tease, he said as he kissed my neck. A moan escaped my mouth and I covered it immediately. Dick, I muttered, and Maddox chuckled as he sucked and nipped gently at my skin. You've already seen that, Maddox said, and I widened my eyes. I cannot believe you just said that, I replied, and Maddox laughed. Maddox mumbled, and I felt tingles run down my spine. I felt his teeth trace my skin and elongate with his Chapter 25. I woke with a start, my neck was sore, and Maddox was sleeping soundly beside me. I smiled as I spotted the mark on his neck before touching my own. The skin was still sensitive. The sun had already gone up, and almost all of our candles went out over the night. I gingerly sat up. I found the dress I wore yesterday and sighed in relief as I slipped it on. I stared at Maddox before kneeling back down and studying his face. He looked completely calm and unguarded. Maddox's eyes fluttered open, and he immediately beamed at me. Morning, he greeted. Morning, wanna go for a run? I asked. He grinned before he got up and shifted into his black wolf. Of course, he said through the mind link as his wolf panted at me, his tongue hanging out. Okay then, I said as I slipped out of the dress and shifted into my wolf. Shook my fur and barked at Maddox. Are we running or what? I asked, and Maddox's wolf barked back as he took off into a sprint. I let out a huff before sprinting in his direction, caught up with him and barked. Thanks for the warning, I mind-linked, and Maddox's wolf barked twice at me. You're welcome. I mentally groaned as we dashed through the forest and down towards the lake. Halfway through, I heard a strange sound and stopped. Hilaire? Maddox asked, and I felt the worry that filled his head. He trotted towards me and tilted his head. There's something. I trailed off as I sniffed the air. I caught the scent of a familiar person. Over there. I mind-linked as I darted to my left and sprinted off. Maddox followed closely behind me. Smell that? I asked, and Maddox barked. Clearly, he responded, and I continued to follow the scent. Once I get close enough, I felt a dark feeling swallow me up. Maddox, go. I heard a loud whimper and turned around. I watched as Maddox's wolf fell limp to the ground and a figure emerged from the darkness. Ivra and it, you have a purpose, a female voice said from behind him. Maddox was awake, but his eyes revealed his pain. Run! Maddox yelled through the mind link, and I heard his wolf yelp as the figure stepped out of the shadows. The figure was that of a woman, and my eyes widened upon recognizing her. Her eyes were dark blue, her hair blonde and pulled into an elegant style, and she stared at me with disdain. You broke the rules, Hilaire, she said, and I widened my eyes. And you will pay for it. I launched my wolf at her only to find me suspended up in the air. She looked at me and then at Maddox's wolf. From her side she pulled out a dagger, and without so much as another glance, thrusted it at me. I watched as Maddox whimpered in his wolf form as the point of the blade raced towards me. Hilaire, wake up! Maddox yelled, and I opened my eyes to his blazing amber. Once. What? I asked, and Maddox sighed in relief before embracing me. You were having a nightmare, Maddox said, and I swallowed a dry lump in my throat. Just as I was about to speak, Maddox froze up. Alpha, Luna. Sorry to cut your day short. We have incoming Jasper mind linked. I stared blankly at Maddox. Got it. Everyone in your places. Hilari's already at the front. Send Naomi to the east with Ian. Lorraine will stand guard with Winter at the pack house, Maddox ordered, and I watched as he got up and rummaged through the pillows in the teepee. So much for romantic, I thought, and Maddox chuckled. Don't forget, I can hear you now, Maddox said, and I rolled my eyes. I know, fuckface, I replied as Maddox handed me a set of clothes. I had these prepared in case something was to happen. You can find your guns. Back at the pack house, right? Maddox asked. Of course, I said as I got up and put on my clothes. I grinned at Maddox's choice, a thick black leather jacket, my usual combat boots, a plain black tank top, and some jeans. Maddox eyed me as I dressed up. Not gonna change? I asked, raising my eyebrow. His white jeans were the sole thing he was wearing at the moment. I prefer my wolf, he said, and I nodded my head. Are you gonna bring me to the pack house, or are we just gonna stare at each other? I asked, and Maddox smirked at me before shifting into his black wolf. He barked and lowered himself as I climbed onto his back. We made it to the pack house, and I found that there were wolves on guard already. I got off Maddox's back and he barked at me. I'll head to the front. Take care of yourself, okay? Maddox mind linked and I smirked. When don't I? Get your ass up there and do your job, Cross, I said, and I sensed the amusement in Maddox as he turned slowly, glancing at me before taking off. I ran into the pack house and made my way up to the bedroom. As soon as I got there, I put on my leather holster and placed my guns at my sides. I brought more than enough magazines and pulled my hair up into a ponytail. I made my way downstairs and saw the elderly and the youngsters of the pack already settling in. Luna, a voice called from the side. I turned to its direction and found Jillian with a few children. What's the problem? I asked. Your mom and siblings are in here, but we're going to lock down the pack house. It'll be inaccessible until you and Maddox return, Jillian informed me. All right, are we missing anyone? I asked, and Jillian shook her head. We gathered everyone right after the ceremony, she responded, and I raised my eyebrows. How did you guys? Hilaire, head straight towards the southern border. Maddox mind linked me and I sighed. Never mind. Take care of them. I'll be right back, I told Jillian, and she nodded as I quickly got out of the pack house. Last time I checked, the pack house wasn't centered around the borders. It was leaning more towards the western side. I sprinted as fast as I could through the forest and began to hear what seemed to be the sounds of the intruders. A werewolf. It was easier to make the run from the pack house to the southern border. I imagined being human would tire me out within 2 minutes of full-on sprinting. I reached the southern border and was immediately hit with a pang of pain in my abdomen. Shit, Maddox, I thought to myself as I used the mate bond to sense him. I went for my intuition and sprinted to my right. Maddox! I screamed through the mind link. I dashed my way through trees and jumped over shrubs as I sensed the mate bond grow stronger. I heard the familiar growl of Maddox's wolf and a few voices shouting. It seems my little one has made it, a male voice said as I entered the clearing. I found Hilary, Scar, and Mikhail, who was holding Maddox back. Everyone's eyes were on me, and my gaze landed on two figures. Aunt Eleanor? I called out, and I watched her grin. She had deep blue, almost violet eyes, and she wore a sleek black coat that fell to the ground. She had her arm around a male with pale, ice-cold eyes and an amused look on his face. Min Silder, he greeted, and I raised my eyebrows. Oh, for fuck's sake, I said with a sigh. Can everyone please stop speaking? Crazies. It's like you all expect me to be able to understand what you are saying. Hilaire, stay calm and focus, Maddox said, and I could feel the subdued anger in his voice. I glanced over at him and at Mikhail. Leave this place, Faustus. We have no reason to, Hilary began, but Faustus interrupted her. Oh, do be quiet, Faustus said as he used one hand and beckoned me to come towards him. I felt a pull in my chest, and my feet were lifted off the floor as I was dragged in front of him. I was very disappointed in you, Hilaire, but impressed all the same, Faustus said, and I glared at him. I have no clue what the fuck you're talking about, I said through gritted teeth, and Faustus grinned. It seems you are losing your grip, Hilaire. That is understandable. After all, you had no idea what the mating ceremony would do to you. Besides, I see that you and your mate have succeeded, Faustus said as he did a motion with his fingers. My head moved on its own and bared my neck to reveal my mark. Let her go, Maddox said as he shifted into his human form. Yet surprisingly, he was clothed in a skin-tight black armor. It was no doubt Hilary's doing. So you did assign a pawn. How cute, Aunt Eleanor said, and I felt something constrict around my throat. I gasped for air before I was dropped to the ground, struggling for air. What are you doing to her? Hilary asked in a solemn tone. You'll find out soon enough, Faustus responded, and Aunt Eleanor made her way towards me. I am somewhat thankful Alynna was smart enough to hold on to her consciousness. It made the journey here a bit more exciting. But I have no time to waste, Faustus said. Proceed, Eleanor, he said, and Aunt Eleanor untangled herself from him and began to chant incoherently. Her eyes became blood red, and it felt like a large punch hit me from above. My back arched from the pain and I tried to scream but I couldn't. Maddox's growls were loud and clear, and I watched through tears as he tried to hurl himself towards me, only to find himself unable to even get an inch closer. Hilary immediately began to work her spells. Mikhail stood at what seemed to be the barrier, and Scar had taken off his black gloves and took out a set of knives. Nothing, I'm afraid, will be able to stop me this time, Faustus said, and Mikhail let out a feral growl. You have hell to pay, Mikhail said, seething with anger. We have hell to pay, brother, Faustus said with a smile as he looked eerily at me. The pain has subsided, but as I tried to get up, Faustus used a wave of his hand and my body was hurled towards a tree. I was smacked horizontally against it and I heard the sound of my bones cracking. Maddox let out a scream of pain that mirrored the exact amount of pain that coursed through me. I am going to kill you, I said breathlessly, and Faustus laughed maniacally. Poor little mate, broken little mate, Faustus said, changing the lyrics to the damn song. My eyes suddenly felt as if they were on fire. By blood I bound you to my soul. My demands are yours forever to obey. Go to hell, I hissed as I felt my bones heal. I got up and Maddox growled. I pulled out one of my guns from its holster and as fast as I could, fired in Faustus' direction. I gawked. The bullet aimed right at his head stopped just in front of him. He smirked as he turned to face me. It would be a waste to just turn you into a mindless follower. Perhaps breaking you again is the best course of action, Faustus said as he nodded his head. My shooting hand twisted, and I heard the sound of my bones snapping. I screamed in agony and fell to the ground. My breath was ragged as Faustus' eyes began to glow. Out of them emerged the shadow of a wolf-like creature. Now then, my child, let us show your friends what exactly macabre looks, and Faustus began as he looked over at Maddox. Feels like. I watched as the shadowed wolf rapidly growled and launched itself at me. Chapter 26. I was launched towards a tree helplessly as Faustus used his creature to break every part of me again and again. He relished in the pain that Maddox and I shared. I tried to block the mate bond, but I could hear Maddox's pain above my own. The wolf had bitten my arms and shattered my skin and bones. As I lay broken on the floor, the wolf stepped on my back and bit down on the back of my neck. I felt it pull something back, and Hilary screamed in my place. The scale was being pulled out of my own body forcibly. I screamed blood, gurgling my voice and the warm feeling of blood seeping from my neck. I used all my strength to try to block out my bond with Maddox, but it was pointless. As black dots began to blur my vision and my breath became ragged, the creature stopped for a moment, and I watched as blood pooled where I lay down and the stench of my bleeding flesh wrapped around me like a suffocating blanket. Hilary launched her own shadows and powered through Faustus' barrier. Watched her as she tried to keep a composed face, but the worry in her eyes and the sheen of sweat on her forehead showed otherwise. How many children, Faustus? How many had to die for this power? Hilary screamed, and Faustus tilted his head. Now that's a secret. But if you really want to know, I'd say I slaughtered just a little below 1 million, and half of them were her doing, Faustus said, as he looked at me. Pity I can't reveal the full effects of my work on you yet, Faustus added, and his creature circled around me as I healed. Anew. When I healed and attacked me as soon as the process was completed. Say, my dear child, why can't you shift? Faustus asked, and I felt the pain course through me. He was forcing me to shift. Faustus, stop this! Hilary screamed, and I felt the agony as my bones shattered. I wasn't fully healed, and yet my bones were being forced to regenerate. The pain was excruciating. It was as if every part of me was being crushed, snapped, and shoved against each other. I felt a sudden pain that was different from anything else. Coughed out blood and choked on it. My breath was growing weaker and I felt my vision blur every now and then. Faustus raised his eyebrows before smiling and laughing maniacally once more. Oh dear. Already? Faustus wondered, and I felt a mind-breaking headache come over me. The shadow wolf stopped right in front of me and stared into my eyes. It growled at me and I felt anger surge through my veins. My blood suddenly felt like it was boiling. I growled right back at it and Faustus grinned even wider. I think it's about time we show them what we've created. Thank you, Eleanor, Faustus said, and I watched as Eleanor lifted the barrier. Scar made one quick movement, and his knives immediately impaled the damned shadow creature against a tree. Hilary immediately attacked Faustus, a blur of dark shadows launching themselves at him. Maddox made a run towards me, and Mikhail moved at lightning speed to snap Eleanor's neck. I didn't have any more emotion in me to grieve her death. Relisario appear. Release your power, Faustus said, and I felt a sudden numbness. I felt someone shaking me, but my eyes landed on Faustus, who was laughing out of control despite Hilary's shadows shredding his clothes and drawing blood with them. I will return once more, my child, but the damage has been done. And I doubt any one of you can fix that. Rememorari Alair, and Farvelvren Min. Sildur, Faustus said. Hilary screamed commands as I found myself looking at Maddox, who had already taken me into his arms, broken and limp as I was. Don't let him escape, Mikhail, Hilary screamed as I fell into the darkness. That weighed on my eyes. I felt myself lose something that would make me lose my mind. How is she? I heard Hilary say behind the doors. She's coping up, Maddox responded as I lay still on the bed. I was in our room, but I was placed under extreme care. I wasn't allowed to move at all, not that I could. Maddox had a makeshift desk by the bed and would work by my side. He never left me, though I haven't spoken a single word out of my mouth since I woke up the other day. All I had was the mind link. Maddox, could you come here? I asked him, and he immediately went inside and sat on the edge of the bed. It dipped to the side, and he took my hand as gently as he could, knowing full well that all my bones were shattered beneath my pale-looking skin. I couldn't even complain about my stupid blonde eyelashes or the fact that I looked like I had seen a ghost. I could barely eat anything, and if the stupid tube stuck into my skin had anything to say about it, I wasn't healing by any means. I wasn't healing. Hilary had done everything in her power. Mikhail was gone, though, Hilary said. He was on track. Faustus had apparently disappeared without a single trace. There were a handful of dead wolves, but many of the pack did visit me. Ian came with Jillian the other day with flowers, to which I mind-linked my thanks. Jasper and Winter had come with a few movies for me to watch. As for my family, well, I told Maddox to send them home and tell them I was feeling ill. I didn't have the heart to face my siblings or my mother looking like I had been broken and torn apart. Physically I was. Mentally I was filled with a mixture of rage, disgust, and contempt, all of them directed towards myself. I couldn't even recall a single thing about Faustus. Hilary explained that nothing was my fault and that Faustus had manipulated me way before I could have stopped it. I felt stupid. I felt like I had let myself down. I wasn't supposed to let anything and anyone get hurt, and yet if I couldn't protect myself, my mate, and now my pack, what the fuck was I supposed to be good for? To be on fucking display? To be a little doll that just sat around all day? It was killing me inside, and Maddox could see it. He could feel it, and every time it ate me up, Maddox would sit by my side and gently hold me. I felt the urge to punch myself for my uselessness. I had never felt as worthless as I have now, and I could do absolutely nothing about it. No matter how fucking resolved I was to get up and prepare to fight, I couldn't. The truth of the matter was, my body wasn't healing. My bones were like immovable rocks. I didn't even have the healing capability of a human being. I was exactly like a doll. You can't keep being like this, Alair, Maddox mind-linked as he lay by my side. I can't do anything else, Maddox. I'm literally incapable of doing a thing. I've become a goddamn vegetable in the simple matter of hours that Faustus broke me, I said. You're not broken if you're talking as much as you are now. I smirked, thankful that at least my face muscles weren't damaged. What else can I do? I asked, and Maddox sighed. Sleep, Maddox said, and I released a loud breath. Yeah, that works. I woke up with my heart racing against my chest, but my brain was unable to recall what caused the reaction. I looked to my side and found Maddox fast asleep. I wanted to touch him, to run my fingers down the side of his jaw. Maddox's eyes blinked open in the darkness, and he immediately snuggled closer to me. Bad dream? Maddox asked. Yeah, I guess. I can't remember any of it, I responded, and Maddox looked into my eyes. "You'll get better," he said, but it was like a promise more than a reassurance. "I hope so," I replied, and he kissed my cheek. I watched as he promptly fell asleep. His wounds had healed within a matter of minutes when we were out there. I was glad he was fine. After all, he felt all the pain that I had. Because of the mate bond. Then again, I envied him too. I stared at him and fought the urge to cry. Maddox had no idea how much more pain I felt when he was asleep, and I was left alone with my thoughts. Sighed and forced myself to sleep, hoping that tomorrow my bones would heal and move. I woke up to a brightly lit room filled with sunlight. I blinked my eyes a few times before I realized that Maddox wasn't in the room. Over me was a breakfast tray sat on an elevated mini table. There was nothing on it, though, except for a note from Maddox. "Having a meeting. Mind link when you want breakfast," it said. I looked around. Me inside. This was my only chance to figure out if I could move or not. I tried my best to move my fingers. I bit my bottom lip and muffled a scream. As I moved around, tears welled up in my eyes as I struggled to move my legs. I lifted my neck off my pillow and used the force of my body to turn around. When I turned to my right, I found myself staring at my reflection in the tiny bedside mirror. My eyes looked dull, my hair looked brittle, and my lips were chapped. I had bruises everywhere, and it showed through the little white t-shirt dress that I had on. I swallowed the dry lump in my throat. "Fuck it, Fosta said something to you before he left, Alynna," I told myself. What the fuck was it? Rememorari Alynna, I remembered, and I was filled with the urge to say the word out loud. I opened my mouth, and a shaky breath was all that escaped it. "Ari," I began to say, but it only sounded like a whisper. "Rememorari." I managed to wheeze out. I heard the sound of bones clicking and cracking. My eyes widened, and I had the urge to look at my hands. I tried to move them, and gasped as I was able to hold them up to my eyes. "Rememorari Alynna. And Farvel Vren Min Silder. Relasirio Pier. Vettel Hale. Lothrian. Urtri," I chanted in my brain. I paused and stared at my reflection. They made sense to me. In order they were. "Remember, Alynna. Don't forget you're my child. Release your power. There are bad omens. Float. Speak. Rememorari," I said again in a louder voice. My rough voice sounded more like a loud wheezing sound. I felt a surge of warmth from my chest. My back arched from the bed, and I felt my body shake and tremble. I heard the sounds of clicking, and I felt my blood boil. My forehead was wet with sweat, and my body felt like a Rubik's Cube being twisted and turned. "By blood we are bound, and by blood I will be destroyed," I heard a voice in my mind say. It was my voice. It was a memory of some sort. I closed my eyes and bit my bottom lip, fighting the urge to scream as I felt the excruciating pain of my regeneration. It was like being awakened during a surgery. Painful, agonizing, and terrifying. I bit into the duvet of the sheets as hard as I could as I felt my bones heal. When I opened my eyes again, I felt something flow through my veins, something familiar yet strange at the same time. I turned my body effortlessly and lifted myself off of the bed. I took the tubes out of my skin and cringed at the size of the needles that were in me. Stretched my neck and groaned, feeling the cold hardwood under my feet had never felt so relieving. I grinned as I found myself in full control of my body again. I did cartwheels and backbending yoga moves. I wanted to run. I wanted to shift. Filled with elation, I crept slowly out of the room and sneaked my way out of the pack house. Once I was out in the forest, I didn't bother to take my clothes off. I willed myself to shift. Chapter 27. I felt the breath catch in my throat. I had just been standing here human for the past 10 minutes. Shift, goddammit, I thought to myself. I stared at my fingertips. Nothing. No claws. No canines. Nothing. There was nothing but the cold ground under my feet. Nothing but the smell of the forest. I held my hands up. I imagined my wolf and the feeling of forming bones into that of one. I thought of the thrill of having my wolf freed and ready to run around and explore the mountains, paws patting along the forest floor, and the thrill of being able to release the strength of a beast. But here I was with nothing. "Alynna," Maddox yelled, and I heard the sound of several footsteps coming my way. I hadn't made it too far off from the pack house. I was only a few meters away from the patio. I remained there, frozen and shocked. I couldn't shift. "Alynna," Maddox yelled even louder, and I felt his arms wrap around me. squeezing the life out of me as he turned me around and nuzzled my neck. Wrapped my arms around him as well. You can walk. You're okay, Maddox said, slowly calming down. I nodded my head and I spotted Hilary and Scar along with Ian, Jasper and Winter. What's wrong? Hilary asked me, and Maddox released me from his grip. I can't shift, I said. At first Maddox was happy to hear my voice, but when he processed what I've said, a worried look crossed his face. What? He asked. I can't fucking shift, I said as I felt the anger boil under my skin. Stared out into the mountains, and the surrounding air grew electric. Alynna, calm down, Hilary said, and I looked at her and attempted to growl. However, no noise came out of my mouth. I kicked the dirt and ran my hands through my hair. What the hell is going on with me? I screamed and watched as Hilary lifted her hand up. Fini and Alynna Ivran Skivia. Werewolf Renar, she said, and I raised my eyebrows as the language deciphered itself in my head. Stop, Alynna, they know that your power has returned. Heavy eat? Silio Necron min Vulko. Enivra min Satran. Why? He broke my wolf. I don't have my connection, I replied, and Hilary's eyes widened. How are you speaking in my? I don't know, I responded simply. I woke up, somehow healed myself with a magic word, and bam! I had a dictionary of words and fuck knows what stuck up my brain. Meanwhile, my wolf is nowhere to be found. No, she's still there. If you can still mind link me, then she's still there, Maddox said, and I shook my head. I can't feel her. I can't explain it. It's like I'm a part of your pack and I know I could link you. But I'm not. She's in transition, Hilary interjected, and I gave her a questioning look. What do you mean? Maddox asked, and I stared at the ground. Faustus created his own pawn, Hilary said, and I backed away into the forest. A hybrid at that, Hilary continued, and I watched as Maddox looked over at me. My heart leaped into my throat. I couldn't even speak. Alynna, calm down, Maddox said as he walked over to me. I wrapped my arms around myself, wishing I was dead. I was no good to anyone without my wolf. I was no good to Maddox or his pack. I was useless. I was a failure. Alynna, Maddox yelled as he grabbed me and wrapped his arms around me. His right hand was in my hair, securing me to his neck and allowing me to feel the warmth that radiated off of his body. Stop thinking for a second. I'm still here. We still share the same feelings. I can feel the weight on your shoulders. I'm here. Calm down, he reassured me. It was only then that I realized the tingling sensation running down my arms. Once it died down, Maddox loosened his grip until he only had his left arm around my waist. Alynna, come, I think I can help you, Hilary said, and I looked at Maddox, who squeezed my side reassuringly. I nodded my head before Maddox walked me back to the pack house. I dressed in a pair of plain blue jeans and a black shirt, not wanting to bother with anything else. Hilary insisted I bathe myself, so I did, and here I was sitting in Maddox's office with Maddox working at his desk. Hilary placed her hand on my forehead, and I felt a surge of energy flow through me. Vrio Renar Souverain, Ivra Silio, Hilary said. I sighed, deciphering it in my head as, your powers has returned. However, you have done so because of him. I'm not gonna even answer to that. I've already been told again and again that I belong to him. It doesn't mean that I can't get out of it, I said. Io ekrimin inuij vivren tevra. Speak in my language for your mates. Sake. I raised my eyebrows. Speak in her language, my ass. Heavy eat, I asked. Why? Hilary rolled her eyes. She stared at me and an image flashed before my eyes. It was of Maddox throwing everything around in his office with anger and frustration on his face. I blinked a few times before the vision disappeared. I stared blankly at Hilary. He will not take my advice to you well. Hilary's voice rang in my head. You want me to do what exactly? I asked. Train with me, Hilary told me, and I raised my eyebrows. I have no idea what that even means. Why wouldn't Maddox like that? I asked, confused. You'll be too busy working, and alphas like Maddox are possessive, a voice I didn't recognize said, and I turned around and saw what looked to be an aged Maddox. There were silver hairs in his long black hair tied at the back of his head in a low ponytail. He had a black and gray beard. His eyes were a deep brown hue, and he had wrinkles on his face. Let me guess. Are you Maddox's father? I said, and he grinned at me. The one and only, he said before walking a few steps towards me. I did not give you the ability to communicate with me for you to abuse it and use it as telepathy, Hilary said as she shook her head. But it is telepathy. And well, Maddox's mate is my family now. Because I couldn't move as fast as I could before or manage this pack anymore, the least I could do is be a father and help my new daughter out. When did you get here? Maddox asked as he got up from his desk. Just an hour ago. It reeked of blood over at the southern border. I guess no one bothered to clean that up yet, he replied, and Maddox glanced over at Hilary, who sighed. Consider it done, she said before looking over at me. Alair meet Colt, Maddox's father. Nice to get to know the apple of my son's eyes, he said with a wide smile as he extended his hand towards me. I shook it and felt Maddox's presence behind me. Don't give me any trouble, Dad, Maddox said with a heavy sigh. Wasn't going to, Colt replied with a sigh. You could see the resemblance between the two, but honestly they seemed like two completely different men. Colt, why don't you, me and Scar go talk a bit about your little journey around the world? Hilary asked, and he nodded his head. Sounds good. I have quite a few things you'd love to know, Colt replied, before winking at me. Nice to meet you, Alair. I'll be sticking around for a few days, so make sure Maddox keeps on his toes. I smirked as I feel Maddox wrap his arms around my waist before Hilary practically dragged Colt away, offering me a look that practically said she hated Colt's company. As soon as they were gone, Maddox spun me around to face him. Will you train with her? Maddox asked me. I'm thinking about it, I said with a shrug. How long does it normally take? I have no clue, but I know that Hilary's trained others before and we don't see them around for weeks, he said with a sigh as he led us to the couch. We sat down and I rested my head on his shoulder. It'd be a great distraction from not having a wolf, I said, and Maddox immediately turned to face me. I looked at him and he squeezed my waist softly. No matter what you are or how broken you think you are, you're mine. That'll never change, Maddox said as he pressed a soft kiss to my forehead. I know that. It's just, I can feel an empty part of me filled with something foreign and I don't know. Can we change the topic? Asked, and Maddox chuckled quietly before allowing me to snuggle further into him. What do you want to talk about? Maddox asked. Your father. What about him? Maddox asked, and I shrugged. You seem like you guys don't get along. Not in a bad way, but not in a close way either, I said, and Maddox sighed. Well, he wasn't always so easygoing. Hilary gave him a purpose in his life. Back then, he just made a powerful pack that ripped its enemies to shreds. Which you guys technically still do, I added, and Maddox smirked. Yeah, but he was insane. I mean that in the worst way possible, Maddox explained. What about your mother? I asked, and Maddox turned quiet. His eyes seemed distant and lonely. I turned inside as I placed myself on his lap, straddling him. I tilted up his head to stare into my eyes. If you don't want to talk about it, don't, I said as I placed a soft kiss on his lips. He shook his head and tucked a loose hair behind my ear. No, I should tell you. I've never met my mom. Dad doesn't like talking about it, and I have no memories of her. Although people have told me that she wasn't my dad's mate, Dad never got lucky enough. He never found his mate? I asked, dumbfounded. I've heard it happen, but I never thought it was real, though. Maddox nodded. It was like he wasn't given one. Even if he was, he never met her. I know for sure. I asked Hilary that when I was younger. She told me that my dad's mate passed away before he met her. Rumors say it was his punishment for what he did in the past. Maddox explained. I pulled him to the side and we lay together. He played with my hair absent-mindedly. I was more afraid I would receive the same treatment from the goddess, he said as he stared into my eyes. I'm afraid I'm a lot more trouble than I'm worth, I said, and Maddox shook his head. Believe me, being called Hilary's bloodhound is a lot more trouble than it's worth. Hilary's bloodhound? I asked, raising an eyebrow. It's the name most people that recognize her give me. It's my job to protect her. She does the same for the pack. At any point that we need to, Hilary will relocate us to her base in case a major attack comes. It was what we prepared for the night of the mating ceremony, Maddox said, and I nodded my head. How were you guys prepared for that? I asked, and Maddox looked away for a bit. You told me about it, Maddox said, hesitation evident in his voice. I gave him an incredulous look. Something about you losing your consciousness. You did scare the hell out of Vera. Who the fuck is Vera? I asked, and Maddox chuckled. A flirtatious wolf that had the nerve to question you as my mate. You did scar her face with a bullet graze right here in this office, Maddox said, and I grinned. That explains the bullet hole in your wall. She didn't touch you, did she? Asked, and Maddox raised his brow this time. And if she did? He asked. I glared before getting on top of him. I would be very, very angry, I said as I kissed the mark I left on his neck. He groaned softly. And if she didn't? He asked. I'd keep going, I said. He was about to question me further when I captured his lips into mine. Chapter 28. You should sleep, I told Maddox. He wrapped his arms around my waist and pulled me to him. I raised my eyebrows as he pressed our bodies together. I don't really want to, he said, and I pulled the blanket further up to cover my bare chest. You should. I know you haven't slept much since that day, I said as I touched his face in an attempt to be endearing. I was worried, and it's not easy holding back after a mating ceremony, you know, he said, and I rolled my eyes as I allowed myself to relish in the feeling of our bodies touching. Then maybe you should show me, I said with a smirk as we crashed our lips together. Maddox pushed me on the bed, and I giggled as he struggled to remove his shirt. He tossed it aside, and I immediately wrapped my arms around his neck and pulled him down for a deep kiss. I wrapped my legs around his waist and bit his lip. He growled, and I moaned as his hands traveled down my body. I rolled us over so that I was on top of him. I kissed the mark I left him and gently nipped at his skin. Maddox's eyes watched me as I kissed down his bare chest. You're going to be the death of me, he mind-linked, and I chuckled. Let's hope not, I replied. I have somehow managed to shower without waking Maddox. Miracles apparently did happen. Quietly, I put on some underwear, a loose military green tank top, and some pretty black leggings with sheer cutouts on the side, and slipped out of the room. I headed down to grab breakfast for Maddox and I. Maddox had decided to sleep in, and I worried for him. Hillary told me that he hadn't slept much ever since the attack, and I knew he must be exhausted. I spotted Colt sitting alone with some half-empty coffee cup at the breakfast table. Morning, I greeted as I poured out 2 cups of coffee. Morning. Is Maddox still sleeping? Colt asked, and I nodded my head as I set out to cook, taking 3 eggs out of the fridge for some scrambled eggs. He hasn't been sleeping for goddess knows how long, I said, and Colt chuckled to himself. Sounds like him, though I bet your injured state had more to do with it than his habits, Colt said with a sigh. Take care of yourselves, okay? Lucky enough you 2 got each other, he added, and I nodded my head. Want anything? I asked, and Colt shook his head. I'm good, he replied, raising his mug, and I smirked as I mixed some milk and sugar into my coffee. I put a spoon of sugar into Maddox's before cooking the rest of breakfast. Colt put on some relaxing acoustic music, and I continued with my business. Made a plate of scrambled eggs with some buttered toast and added some sausages and beans. Despite Colt's response, I slid a plate for him, and he smiled to himself in appreciation before I placed all the food onto a large tray and headed upstairs. I pushed the door open with my back and sighed in relief when I found Maddox still sleeping on the bed. I placed the tray on the bedside desk and decided to do a bit of stretching. Nothing like yoga after being bedridden for several days. After stretching my legs and arms and being thankful for wearing spandex, I put my trust into my weary arms and legs and performed a handstand, lowering my right leg down so that I almost did a side split. I pushed my body down and lowered myself as my other leg came down. I swung my right leg to the side and let out soft, calm breaths as I stabilized my body, focusing on my balance and using my arm strength to maintain my form. Am I allowed to compliment the view now? Maddox asked from the bed, and I turned my head as much as I could before laughing. Maybe, or you should do your best to join me, I said just as Maddox got off the bed and pulled on some pants. I avoided looking at him as I tried to curve back up into a handstand. Before I could finish the routine, Maddox picked me up by the waist and threw me over his shoulder. I said, join me, not stop me, you deaf motherfucker, I said as I playfully hit his back, and he chuckled as he gently placed me down on the edge of the bed. Breakfast first, he said as he slid the tray of food towards us and picked up a fork. Sure, I said with a shrug as I lifted my legs up, and Maddox eyed me with hunger, but I grabbed a piece of toast and popped it into his mouth. He frowned at me, and I smirked before we began to eat. We finished breakfast and Maddox quickly showered. I put the tray away and laced up my boots. Meet me in the dungeons in 10 minutes, Hilary's voice rang in my head, and I sighed. Hilary asked for you, didn't she? Maddox asked as he walked out, his hair still damp. I nodded my head. I don't see any other jobs for the day, I said, and Maddox nods. Just make sure you come back tonight to sleep, Maddox said as he kissed my cheek. I grunted before reaching for the back of his head and placing a deep kiss on his lips. Maddox lifted me up, and I wrapped my legs around his waist. We're never going to leave if you keep doing that, Maddox mind-linked, and I grinned in between our kisses. As if you'd hate it, I replied as Maddox led us to the door and promptly untangled us from each other. Then make sure you come back for bed, he said, and I rolled my eyes. Seriously, thanks, Dad, I said with a huff, and Maddox laughed. Hey, if you two are done, this beta and his friends have stuff to do, Jasper yelled, and I laughed at him. Yeah, I replied, and Maddox grinned at me. The longer sleep certainly made him look happier. I'll see you later, he said as he gave me one last kiss on my lips. I replied as he disappeared. I walked down the stairs and immediately made my way out to the dungeons. Concentrate, Hilary said as I tried to do the impossible, lift a bullet off a damn table without touching it. I was stuck laying my upper body on the table with my hands stretched out, while my ass sat comfortably on a cushion-padded chair. This room happened to look exactly like a dungeon from a fantasy tale in the best way possible. The floor was clean and white and lit by a large round light system from a high ceiling. The walls were rounded, and the area was practically large enough to fit an arena. I groaned, hands outstretched towards the bullet lying at the center. Well, I am apparently completely incapable of stopping a flying bullet from hitting my face, I said, annoyed. Why not? You've already seen Faustus do it, Hilary said, and I rolled my eyes. He's a sorcerer and you're a sorceress. I'm a hybrid, whatever that means. What happened to being witches? Hilary asked, and I shrugged. Sorcerer sounds cooler, I said as Hilary laughed quietly to herself. You're a hybrid now, a mix between one of us and a wolf, she said. Not really a wolf now that I'm broken, am I? I asked sarcastically, and Hilary rolled her eyes this time. You're not broken. You're in transition. Hybrids aren't exactly a norm, she explained, and I groaned once more. This magic stuff is not my thing, I said. I prefer snapping necks and stabbing people. Much more satisfying. You'll be surprised to see what power does to people, she said with a smile. Trust me, it'll be worth the effort. Try saying a few words. It might get your memory functioning. Sure, I muttered. Lothrian, I said. Nothing happened. This is stupid. I huffed. Don't worry too much. You know how to do these spells. You just need to wake up. I am awake, I dully said. No, you're obviously here, but the rest of you is a muddled mess, Hilary. Sid. Sometimes you need to just relax and say the words like you mean them. It really doesn't get much harder than that, Hilary explained. Just as I was about to perform a spell, the door to the room opened and Scar walked in, nodding curtly in Hilary's direction. I'm going to have to leave for a bit. Do you think you can do it on your own? Hilary asked. I think so, I said, and Hilary looked over at Scar. Perhaps I should leave Scar with you. He's silent but helpful, she added. Before walking away, Scar closed the door behind him and stayed there. Scar always wore black suits in contrast to Mikhail, and the two of them always wore gloves. Scar looks like a butler, and I never had a conversation with him the way Mikhail and I had, though I doubt I could say I was close to either one of them. Just curious, but what's your relationship to Mikhail? I asked as I used my pointer finger to play around with the bullet. Scar didn't answer. Instead, he simply stared at me and what I was doing. Okay, silence is okay too, I muttered as I stood up and walked around the stupid table. Scar stared at me before walking over and setting his hand down on the table. He lifted it up, and a plain borderless fragment of a mirror formed from the bottom of his palms. He picked it up and handed it to me. I took it from him and stared at it. Thanks, I mumbled as I looked at my reflection. I watched as he picked up the bullet from the table and threw it into the air. It traveled fairly high up. He placed his hand out and the bullet stayed in the air. It stayed afloat above us. I stared at it and watched as he balled his hand into a fist, and the bullet dropped back down onto the table with a loud clatter. Okay, great. You can do stuff too. Fascinating, I muttered as I stared at him. Can you speak or are you mute and I'm just insensitive? He stared blankly at me and I sighed. You just don't like talking, huh? I added as I stared at the mirror. I took a deep breath and studied my reflection. Maddox mentioned something about another version of myself, but what if she disappeared because of Faustus? I stared at the reflection, and Scar stared intently at me before he glanced at the mirror. I stared at the mirror and squinted my eyes. I focused on my eyes and I felt a soft fuzzy feeling fill my head. You need more focus, a deep male voice said in my head. We're close. I raised my eyebrows and looked over at Scar. He stared at me blankly. I returned my gaze to the mirror. How long have you been trying to talk to me? I asked. No response. I bit my bottom lip. Archery Alaire, I said in my head. I stared at the mirror before closing my eyes and taking a deep breath. Probed my mind for things like the mind link but tried to focus on my senses. I took a deep breath. There was a soft thrumming sound inside the room, and I felt the cold temperature of the room. I sensed the way the air gathered around my body, the way each little moving particle exuded power. I felt a very stiff and unmoving mass of energy in front of me. It was precise and exact but controlled and calculated, as if it was afraid it would slip up and reveal any part of him. My right hand raised. I pointed in the direction of the mass, but my eyes remained closed. Hear me now? I asked. Clearly the voice responded. I opened my eyes and found Scar nodding his head. Before his eyes widened, he walked over to me, and once we were a meter apart, he closed his eyes. He slipped his hand into his coat and pulled out a vial of clear and crystal liquid. He handed it to me. Drink. What is it? I asked, and he simply stared at me. Well, he really didn't talk much. I placed the mirror down on the table and took the little vial. I removed the little silver topper before pouring the contents of the vial into my mouth. I was about to hand the vial back to Scar when a quick warm sensation spread in my chest. I closed my eyes and felt my senses heighten. I could feel every crevice in the room. Everywhere air went in and out. The quick vibrations of light and the way each little thing seemed to have its place. I opened my eyes again, but this time I had to blink several times. In front of me was a full-sized mirror that now made up half of the entire room. And it was just my own self, but she was smirking. Takes a dose of hellfire to wake you up, huh? She said, and my eyes widened. Oh, don't look so surprised. I did warn Maddox about Faustus, and we're one and the same. We are just blocked out by Faustus' stupid fucking enchantments. You do know that this is weird, right? I said. I'm you and you're me. I'm used to it, but Faustus blocked our combined memories because I come with more demons than what even he can control demons. That aren't necessarily good, she replied, and I thought for a moment. I think we can handle it, I said with a shrug, and she smirked at me. Of course you do. I thought so too, but these things aren't good to experiment with, she replied. But you also can't do much without them. What happens to you if I break this glass down? I asked. I disappear and we join together. Obviously. Then we count down the days. Until we go insane or Faustus takes us back before we do, and we end up doing that anyways, she explained. I was about to talk, but I saw something in the mirror. So that's where you've been hiding, a familiar voice said, and I felt the chill run down my spine. You can't touch us from where you are, my reflection answered. I looked to my side and found that it was empty, but out of the shadows in the mirror came the figure of Faustus. Is that so? He asked, and I watched as my reflection fearlessly looked into my eyes. Don't be afraid of him. He can't do anything unless he's here with you, she said, and I nodded my head. Faustus looked over at me, and my blood ran cold. They can't keep you from me for long. You'll come to me of your own accord, Faustus said, and my stomach dropped. Don't listen to him, my reflection said, but I sensed the worry in her voice. Oh, you both know you will, he said just as he touched the glass, and I felt myself burst out of a